Hi, thank you so much for inviting me to present. I'm honored to share with you a little bit about my thoughts on sketching, visual communication, and really how this thought can be applied to anything that you pursue. The at the core of my message is how to apply yourself in a way that will allow you to excel and be really great at whatever it is you want to do. In my case, it was sketching, and so I'd love to take you through this presentation. What follows is going to be a voiceover overview of this presentation that I've given over the years as I've traveled throughout the United States and around the world and shared this with schools, businesses, and individuals as a means of conveying my passion for visual communication and design. So please sit tight, feel free to take notes, and I hope you enjoy. The first thing I'm going to do here is introduce myself. So I am Spencer Nugent. I'm a designer. I started designing back in 2004 when I started school, but my story begins before then when actually I wanted to become a math teacher of all things. And so I spent a lot of time working out the left side of my brain or right side, whichever it is, the one that's more logical, studying math and really applying myself to mathematics. And the lights kind of turned on for me when I had a friend, his name is Steve, and he showed me industrial design and what it was all about. And it was a really life-changing experience because what Steve didn't know is that as a youth, as a child, I was fascinated with things, how they worked, how they went together. And not only that, but I was exposed to art at an early age. My father, who was a chemist by day, he would paint at night, paint pictures of people, landscapes, whatever. And so I always valued art. I thought art was a great thing, but I never was able to see or make the connection between art and making a living. So where design happened, I felt as though, hey, this is something that I could do and make a living doing. I always ask the question, what do you want to get out of this presentation, this experience today? And usually this would involve some sketching, some workshopping as well. But even this presentation, ask yourselves, what do you want to get out of this as I speak to you? Because frankly, this perhaps won't be a life-changing experience. You're not going to leave the room or this presentation with some immense increase in skill. Perhaps you'll leave, and I hope I can leave this with you, a love for drawing, or even more specifically, a love for learning, or a desire to learn, a desire to apply yourself to be better. Most of you would recognize me and my work perhaps through two websites, idsketching.com and Sketchaday. ID Sketching started as kind of a side project that me and a coworker decided to do after watching a YouTube video. This is way back in 2007, 2008, where we saw this video and it was horrible. And we thought, hey, we can do better than this. One thing led to another. And before you know it, we were learning how to code and staying up late at night trying to figure out how to build a website. And so that's where ID Sketching came from. Sketchaday actually started as a feature in ID Sketching and now has kind of overtaken ID Sketching as my pet project thing that I do. And it was born out of a desire to practice and be accountable to a wide audience. So I don't sketch every day for the website, but I do draw something every day on my own, whether or not I do post it. So it's something that has motivated me and has helped me to keep my skills up to date. As I have found myself as a professional, when you're a student and you've got assignments and requirements for those assignments, hey, sketch 25 pages or 10 or whatever the case may be, it's really easy to be engaged in regular practice, but as you become a professional, your sketching can become more sporadic, especially as you advance in your career. So what this has done is it's given me an opportunity to be accountable and to consistently practice my sketching. Here's a couple of examples of work that I've published on sketchaday.com. Again, you can check that out at Sketchaday. You can find me on Instagram as well at sketchaday.com. There's my Instagram handle, or facebook.com/sketchaday. And more specifically and more recently, I've kickstarted, whatever, my YouTube channel at youtube.com/sketchaday.com. So you can check me out there. So what do I do during the day? Well, I'm a creative director for a group within a home automation company called Space Monkey. And without going into a lot of detail, it involves cloud storage products as well as user experiences around cloud storage. So things like how do you manage your photos, back files up, and how does that kind of interweave or work its way into the smart home. So if you have questions about that, you can always email me, and I'd be happy to answer those. I have traveled a lot of places. I'll be excited to add more logos to this page as my travels continue. But this has been, this invitation rather has been something that I've felt honored to be a part of. So thank you again for inviting me. The first thing I'd like to talk about is visual language and what that is. When I started in industrial design, I was terrified because I was a math major and I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. But I did know that I had to draw. I did know that I had to communicate. Because my professor on the first day, he shared this quote: "A man who cannot communicate his ideas is on the same plane as one who has no ideas." And that really sat with me for a long time. It really profoundly impacted me on that first day. And I decided very early on that I was going to be the best at communicating. Because really, if you think about language, it's about two things: structured symbols with implied meaning. So take the English alphabet, for example. We have 26 characters, A, B, C, D, and so on. And these characters are made up of lines and positive, negative space, and they have a phonetic value. And by combining these symbols together with their meaning, we're able to create words, and words combined create sentences and so forth. So something as simple as fruit, fruit, may invoke some sense of perhaps your favorite fruit, or it could be a fruit that you don't like. Whatever the case may be, you're thinking of some fruit. But unless I can precisely express clearly what fruit I want you to think about, your mind wanders. You think about different things. Same thing with the three letters, R-E-D, phonetic value, together creates the word red. And you each may be thinking of a different shade of red, and that's totally fine. It's totally okay, because what you'll find is that with spoken language, it takes a lot to really clearly express a concept or idea. And so visual communication then becomes the clearest means of expressing directly to someone what it is you're thinking. If you can execute it really well, it's a really powerful way of expressing that idea. I love symbols. I think they're great. This is an example of a symbol that you might find anywhere around the world, and you'd have a fairly good sense of where to go. Here's another symbol that you could take a look at. This one, I'm sure you can guess, it means no smoking. Anywhere you traveled in the world, you could assume that in this particular area that you saw that symbol, you're not supposed to smoke. Visual communication crosses cultures, boundaries, and disciplines. Here's just a few examples of stop signs. A red octagon with a white boundary. Now, I have come across one example that is different. That is in Japan. It's a red triangle with a white boundary, but you could safely assume that if you saw a red octagon with a white border, that it means stop, even if you can't read the language. And therein lies the power of visual communication, to cross these cultures, boundaries, and languages. Just as in spoken communication or verbal communication, we have a visual alphabet, and it all begins with lines, circles, triangles, shapes, what have you. You've got gestured, implied lines, contour lines, construction lines. You've got different surface finishes, matte, shiny, dull, perspective, dynamic, and so forth, that all play into the quality or type of message that you communicate visually. Much as you would have different mechanics as you speak, you may gesture, you may use different words or emphasis or intonations. Those kind of things are analog to visual communication. Visuals speak louder than words. I forgot to mention, perhaps at the beginning of my video, because I always do, that I am from the island of Jamaica, and it's a beautiful place. And if I were to try to express to you in the clearest possible language that I could, something that I saw quite frequently, a tropical sunset with shades of the most sublime hues I've ever seen, and I could add things like, there's reds and pinks, and there's silhouettes of trees, you might start to form a fuzzy picture in your mind of what this experience is, or what it could have been for me. But it's not until I present you with a very clear picture, even a photograph of that experience, that then you're able to empathize and directly relate to that thing that I saw and could appreciate on a daily basis. Visuals are concise and powerful. Photography is one of my hobbies. I've never been to the moon, for example, but photography is a powerful tool because it can give us new perspective. It can give us an appreciation for beauty at scale. Here's a macro photograph of a caterpillar, and you can see the symmetry, the texture, the color, and the richness that, at normal scale we might overlook. It can transport us to another time and preserve moments so that we can appreciate them. And it can also help us empathize with others. Here's a touching moment of a son helping his father get dressed, and his father obviously does not have hands anymore. So just a really touching moment that we can empathize with through this photograph. Now, if you think of visual communication as a sphere or a whole, sketching is really just a small subset of the tools that are at our disposal if we're trying to communicate an idea. So therein lies the question, why sketch? If there's so much that we can do to express an idea, why sketch? Well, as the title of the presentation implied, between the thought and the thing is a sketch. There's many ways to get from that initial thought to that final object, that final thing. And you've got things like computer-aided design, programs like SolidWorks or Alias or Rhino or whatever the thing that people are using nowadays might be. But these tools inherently have constraints, and these constraints can limit us in our free thinking and ideation. Model making is another tool that we can potentially use, but it's really time consuming. You break out your clay or your foam. That's not to say they're not valuable pursuits or efforts, but it's not the most efficient way. Sketching allows us to freely express a concept or idea on a piece of paper, and it's cheap and it's low commitment. So for example, a good way to have a great idea is to have a lot to choose from, especially when you're not sure yourself of your concepts. This is a sample page from my studies as a student way back in, I think, 2006, where I was exploring concepts for a sponsored project for Intel. And without getting into the mire of details here, it really wasn't until the end of the project that I had kind of gotten everything that I had in my head out, that I was able to see the solution. And so this was an example of how sketching was able to help me kind of process and think through things. It's a great medium for fluid and creative output in design. Cheap, low commitment, and high volume. So you can pump out a lot of sketches in the same amount of time as it would take you to create a model, for example. Design really is about communication. It's important to always remember as you sketch, as you design, as you model make, whatever the case is, that you're listening to a set of requirements and that you're communicating those requirements back onto your piece of paper or through whatever medium you're using. And so I find that sketching, in the moment, it's a really powerful thing to be able to take a client or friend or colleague or professor, whoever, up to a whiteboard or chalkboard and say, here's the concept I was thinking of, and here's, just be able to really have a conversation around your sketch. It's a really, really powerful thing to be able to do that. So the second thing I'd like to talk about is rapid visualization. And essentially, rapid visualization, I didn't come up with this term, but it's a set of drawing techniques that utilizes simple methods and efficient drawing methods to communicate real objects and ideas. And it kind of boils down to three things: abstraction, simplicity, and style. So here are a couple examples of rapid visualization. I'll get into what abstraction, simplicity, and style mean. But as you can see, there's a certain energy to these sketches, a certain looseness, a certain freshness, where take something as simple as a line, for example, that doesn't really exist in real life. In rapid visualization, we use lines to express the limits of the object that we can see, or the limits of an object that we're drawing, because lines don't exist in real life. And line can be used to shade or communicate texture. It's a really powerful tool. Here's another example of a sketch done using a ballpoint pen, pencil, so kind of similar flavor or feel. Now, this is borrowing from my math background and technical background a little bit, but if I were to form a 2x2 matrix, you can see that rapid visualization lives kind of in that upper quadrant that deals with abstraction and simplicity. Just to illustrate, in the lower right corner, you could imagine something like photography resting in that corner as something that is incredibly complex and realistic at the same time. There are some elements, however, that we don't want to forget. Even though we're abstracting and simplifying things, it's about composition, contrast, perspective, language, color, shadow, and form, to name a few things. But most importantly, simplify, simplify, simplify. Try to think of very simple, clear, efficient means of communicating those concepts or ideas. Designers are salespeople, and the reason I say this and the reason I teach this principle is, you remember I talked about design being about communication. Well, if you've ever gone into an electronics store or a car dealership or anywhere that there is kind of this push sales model, you might run into a guy kind of like this, or a person rather, who is trying to get you to buy a product. And what I found, and this is a powerful principle, what I found is that if you want to be a successful designer, you have to understand two things, much like this guy understands. So you go into this place, you don't know what you're going to get, and if you run into this guy and you're unprepared, he or she will have you convinced that, hey, this is the product you need, it's for you, you can afford the payment, whatever the case may be. They are really good at their job. And the reason is they understand people, so how people work. Understanding how people work is the first thing that you need to understand as a designer. This next thing is to have a masterful command of language. So they know the words to use, how to use them, and that combined with understanding people allows them to time things and use these tactics to basically sell you on this idea of a product or an experience or whatever the case may be. And so as a designer, if you can understand people, and if you have a really good command of your language, your tools, your methods and means of communicating, you'll be a much more effective designer. I like to think that with anyone in any situation, you have about 30 seconds to capture someone's imagination. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more, but you have a very limited time to capture someone's attention, imagination, or even captivate them and convince them that you're worth their time. And so the more effectively you can communicate, the better and more successful you'll be. So let's dive into the process of sketching itself and kind of what that means and how it works. So very rarely do I ever sit down and just come up with a final idea and just say, hey, I'm done. You know, I'd be really wealthy if that were the case. Unfortunately, it does take me a few iterative tries to get to that solution. But the reason I like to think that happens is our brain kind of gets in the way. Even though our brain is the genesis of ideas, and that's kind of where these fleeting ideas kind of spark and start and develop, we're still interpreting fuzzy pictures. I like to think of as fuzzy mental pictures. But the more aware we are of the process, I think the more successful we'll be. So it works something like this. We start at the top of the circle, visualizing in our brain the concept of what we want to draw or execute. And then the next step, right, so the idea is here, the next step is to then use your arms to draw the first line or the first circle or whatever the case may be. And then we evaluate with our eye. So we look at the paper and we say to ourselves, either, wow, this is really good, or this is not good. And at that point, you either crush your drawing up and throw it away, or you make a correction and you work with it. But whatever the case may be, just being aware of this process is going to help you so much more. Because what I find is that sometimes students, when they're just starting out drawing or sketching, they'll actually get really frustrated with this process because there's a lack of understanding of what the process is going to be and a misalignment of expectation going into the pursuit. So as long as you understand this, it'll increase your chances for success, I think, as a sketch artist or as a designer. It's important to have a conversation with your sketch. Essentially, be present, be aware, and be mindful as you're sketching and drawing. Humans, when you're talking about sketching products or things, humans, we bring logic, we bring order to chaos. That's what design is about as well. It's bringing order to chaos. So even drawing something, like there's a methodical approach. So something like this webcam, for example, you can see that I started with an axis. I have my ellipses, curves, and so forth, and adding details to then create the final thing. As with mastery of any other language, mastering your visual communication skills is going to take dedicated effort and continued practice. There are no shortcuts. So one question I get a lot is, what makes a good sketch page? And the answer is really about four things, I think. The first is form. So take a computer, for example, a desktop computer. I might start out sketching a few form ideas. Okay, what does this thing look like from multiple angles, multiple perspectives, and so forth. The next would be function. So how does it work? Maybe the side opens up and it's a modular case, neatly organized, and so forth. The next thing is context. So not only do we give form to things and function, but communicating where they live and why they deserve to exist and how they better the life of the person using the product is a really important part of telling the complete story. So perhaps this computer has a rail system and it lives under a desk, for example. Just a simple example there. The last thing is detail. So what are the kind of sweet little things that make this thing so awesome? So it might be locking tabs, it could be locks, it could be lights, whatever the case may be. It could be vent details, that kind of thing. But when we bring all these elements together, you can see that now I have a sketch page complete with form, function, context, and detail. Okay, so sketch page, form, function, context, and detail. Here's another example, solar powered backpack, and this is all in one page, but you can see I've got my form, function, context, and detail. A few other examples that don't include all four elements but still function in part to tell a story. Here you've got form and function. You've got context and form, for example. Here's form and detail. Okay. And another example of form, function, context, and detail all on one page. These are some microwavable food trays that I did for a client. But you can see that on this sketch page, there are these elements that are all included to tell part of that complete story. So we don't really use this so much in spoken language as much anymore, but there are certain formalities to speaking and using written communication. The same could be said for visual communication. There's certain levels of sketching, and I find that this helps me decide how to best utilize my time because the audience essentially determines the level of sketch that I produce and how efficient I will be with my time. So the first is personal communication, and this is the type of sketch that I would do for myself in my sketchbook, not meant to be shown to anyone per se, but more as a record of my visual thinking. So they tend to be more gestural, loose, overlapping, rough, something that I can interpret, but not necessarily something that a client would be able to interpret on their own. A thinking or exploratory sketch is another example. So here's an example of the type of sketching I do when I'm iterating something that I may show to a client or another designer, a contemporary of mine if I'm working in a studio, for example. And these sketches are iterative. You can see that you start with one form and kind of evolve and develop these ideas and concepts as you go on. The next would be functional or technical sketching, which relates to the idea of storytelling that I talked about before. But in this case, things like exploded views, how things fit together. I like drawing robots, so here's an example of the head of a robot exploded, and a kind of a luggage shopping cart type thing. Presentation sketching, and at this point, this is where you clean everything up and you can show a client the really sweet sketch to kind of sell the idea and hit it home. And typically here I'll take a sketch that I've done either on paper or digitally and then further enhance it in a program like Adobe Photoshop. Sometimes, however, I do keep the sketches analog, as in this case. But here's another example of sketching with a pencil to Photoshop and so forth. So that would be my presentation sketch. Lastly, I've got the emotive sketch, which is another example of a sketch that I would use to evoke or convey some excitement, perhaps, to sell the idea. So typically using things like unusual, unconventional points of view. It could be skewing proportions and details. It could even be dropping the lines from a sketch so it becomes more ethereal and more painterly. Or in this case, it could be capturing the essence of an object without being so descriptive in its lines and details. So something like motorcycles, for example. I love these sketches. I didn't do them. This is my friend, John Mullenkamp, did these, but I really like them because they capture that excitement of the motorcycle and the energy of that product. So what is the secret sauce here? What's the key to getting better as a sketcher, designer? And I would say this applies to anything you want to do in life. Well, talent is only really a small part of your pursuit. And I hate to break it to you, but there really is no secret pen, there's no secret paper. It's all about practice, practice, practice. And my experience kind of maps something like this. I find that as I'm trying to become better at something, that I'll work hard and I won't see any immediate increment or improvement. This could be said for working out in the gym, it could be said for training a marathon, whatever the case may be. There's this period of time where you're putting in the work and you're not really seeing the immediate results. But essentially what happens with our bodies, with our minds, I don't know the science behind this, I just know my experience. And that is, I wake up one day, next morning, and all of a sudden everything just clicks and life's amazing and my sketching skill has just gotten so much better. And I don't understand why, but it just works that way. And you'll eventually hit more and more of these. But on the flip side, the key to getting frustrated is inconsistently practicing, because what will happen is you'll still get that incremental increase in skill, but then you might slack off and you're not going to return to the level that you were at before. However, you will see a diminishing of your skills and you don't get the same improvements that you get as you consistently practice over time. I tried an experiment once, and I'd encourage you to do this, whether it's sketching or model making, whatever the case may be. Try sketching 500 pages. That's a ream of paper, at least it is here in the United States. 500 pages of printer paper. I tried to finish that in 1 month. It works out to about 17 pages a day. It took me about 2 to 3 hours a day, and I ended up with a nice fat stack of sketches. And it was an amazing experience for me because I was able to see in a very short period of time some really amazing results with my sketching. I was able to become more confident and I felt like I was having fun and ideas started flowing a lot more fluidly and so forth. It's really important that you keep a sketchbook if you want to be good. It's your playground, it's your opportunity to have fun. It can be anything from a stack of papers, loose papers, to now my sketchbook is my iPad Pro. That's what I typically sketch on most of the time. But the important thing is to have one. Relax and have fun with it. Draw crazy stuff. Draw things that aren't in your main field of study. Draw unexpected things, things that challenge yourself, because then you can really start to experiment and push yourself. If you're getting comfortable in your sketchbook, try something new, unexpected. It might be a new tool, it might be new subject matter. Just do something to mix it up. And that's going to be, again, because it's in your sketchbook, an opportunity for you to just really let go and have fun. There's no pressure to show anyone your work or present it to a client. And that's what makes keeping a sketchbook so great, I feel, is it really is your playground and your opportunity to practice. Take it everywhere you go. I used to draw on the train as I would travel to work or on the bus. And this was an interesting time in my life because I really wanted to get good at drawing people. And if you've ever tried to draw someone in real life, inevitably what happens is they see you drawing them, and you look up, they see you, and you lock eyes. And it's almost as if time stands still and the awkwardness builds until one of you breaks gaze. And that happened a few times and it made me really uncomfortable. And I just had this bright idea. I thought, okay, if they don't see me rather, then it's not a big deal, right? So I got some aviator glasses. They're these big aviator glasses. And they were all chromed out, so I figured, okay, they can't see my eyes. And then I got this giant hoodie, and I would pull this hoodie all the way down, and I would draw people on the bus or the train every day. And it was probably very creepy now that I think back at it. But needless to say, I took every moment, every opportunity I could to practice and draw people at the time because I wanted to be better. Which leads me to my next point. If you want to be good at drawing, you have to fill your well. You can't draw from an empty well, and so you need to draw from observation. If you want to draw houses and draw them really well, you need to look at houses and draw them really well. If you want to draw cars really well, you need to look at cars and draw them really well before you can then make that leap or that step, right? You feed your brain that information. You're making connections, creating symbols, and you can pull those symbols out and use them later on. So here's a couple examples of people that some are observational and some are imaginary. But again, it all goes back to that principle. If you want to get better, practice consistently over time. So here's a couple examples of some of my early work, really early on, where if you follow me online, I like to draw robots. And the important thing about the sketch isn't how bad the sketch is so much as the date on the sketch. So as I was practicing as a freshman in college, I would date all my sketches, and this one in particular was dated December 17th, 2004. And I'm not sure what happened between this sketch and the next sketch, but 5 days later I produced this piece of work. And as the date says, December 22nd, 2004, it was a 5-day period. So this might have been one of those times where my brain made all the connections and my skills were increasing, or what, I don't know what it was, but there was a pretty big difference between this robot that I did, one of my early first robots, and the subsequent robot. There was some connection made, something magical happened. But that's what happens when you consistently practice. And over the years, I've gotten better and been able to handle more complexity, and even started incorporating people into robots. This was a commissioned piece I did for Epson back in the day. This is another piece I did for Epson as well. So with practice, and more recently in Procreate, with practice you can get better and better and better over time. So this is one of my first cars that I did. Again, pretty hilarious. Did this in college. And this wasn't 5 days later, but you can see with time, over time, that these sketches have gotten better and better as time has progressed. So practice is really important. And if you stick to it, and if you're consistent, you'll find that you too can acquire amazing skills. Remember, I was a math major. I wasn't good at this stuff overnight. It took a long time for me to practice. It's important to find your style or find your voice in your sketch. And you can do that in a few ways. One is to find inspiration. Be inspired, whether it's finding some work that makes you just want to get up and just draw, or it could be trying to figure out, okay, what's the secret sauce in this artist's or this designer's work? What makes his or her stuff, or their stuff rather, look so good? And these are just a couple examples: goodbrush.com, Craig Mullins, and also Sasha Salipinov. He used to have a blog called Angry Car Designer, but doesn't anymore. Now I think he works for Bugatti or something. In any case, really great work. It's also important to pick a tool. So I like to think of it as a go-to weapon, or go-to, that star player on your team, and kind of have a home base, be grounded in that tool. For me, it's a Papermate Flare pen. You might have seen me use one of these on my YouTube videos, but that is my tool of choice. It's quickly becoming the iPad Pro, but that is my tool of choice. And so pick a tool, because that tool will eventually take on and lend itself to becoming essentially an extension of your personality, an extension of who you are. There is no magic pen, but as I mentioned, putting your personality on the paper is also important. I like to think of myself as generally happy, bubbly, jovial, and so forth. And so I find that sometimes that bleeds into my sketches, and that's okay. It's a good thing to somehow layer your personality into your sketches. Also, break some rules and have some fun. Mess with your perspective, mess with the completeness of your sketch, what have you. Play with things like blending the foreground and background together, or just being a little bit more expressive, for example, in your sketch. It can go a long way to stylistically creating a fingerprint that is yours on your work. So now we come full circle. Remember, a person who cannot communicate their ideas is on the same plane as one who has no ideas. This is really important stuff. If you want to be a great artist or a great designer, or even a great communicator, it all boils down to dedicated effort and practice. Consistency over time is going to yield those results that you want, and it's all about hard work. You put in the time, you will see the results. I've seen the results, and I know that you can as well. So like I said at the beginning, I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation, that you will watch this and feel that you can do it too, because I know you can do it too. I know that you can be great at what you do. If you apply yourself and if you're serious about it, you can do great things. You can do hard things, and each of you can be amazing. So thank you again for this opportunity, and feel free to email me anytime. My email address, I'm really easy to find online, spencer@sketchaday.com, and I'll be happy to shoot you back an email. Might not be right away, but I do answer all my emails. So thanks for this opportunity, and I don't know what else to say, but thank you. Have a great day, guys. So thank you so much again for this opportunity. It was a pleasure to be able to share this with you. I hope you were able to learn something and realize that if you apply yourself, you too can be great. You can be great at whatever it is you want to do. If you just put in the time and the effort, and if you capture a vision for your potential, you can really do great things. I'm really easy to find online. If you have any other questions or anything you want to know, you can Google me or just email me, spencer@sketchaday.com. I may not respond immediately, and those of you who've emailed me know this, but I do get back. I tend to have a lot of things going on, so don't hesitate to contact me. And thanks, guys. Hope you have a great day.